Welcome to our podcast today. I am Victoria King, one of the sector learning and development leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service, and we are here to talk about our recent further investigation into Lewisham Council, which was published in October 2025. Just a note to say that further investigations, like the one we're talking about today, were previously called special investigations, just to clarify that before we start. So today I'm joined by Mel McConnell, and Mel is an insight and systemic lead here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. And the last podcast we did together was on the Green Square Accord further investigation back at the end of last year. And we're back again a year later to talk about this one into Lewisham. So for those who haven't yet listened to the Green Square Accord podcast, it was released in January 2025, so do check that out. But for now, Mel, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your role here at the Housing Ombudsman Service.
Yes, hello Victoria, and thank you for the introduction, and welcome to anyone else that has tuned in. As mentioned, I'm Mel McConnell, one of the Insight and Systemic Leads here at the Housing Ombudsman. So our team deal with many different publications and reports, one of which is the further investigation, which sits under paragraph 49, or the P49 as I'll probably refer to it, of the Housing Ombudsman scheme. It's one of the actions the Ombudsman can take if we consider there are wider and deeper issues responsible for generating complaints at a landlord. And essentially, it's finding out what those are and how to put them right. But we work with landlords to help identify areas for improvement. We've recently changed the way we review landlords under paragraph 49, and Lewisham Council was the last to be completed under our old investigation method. The new way of investigating can be found on the Housing Ombudsman's website if anyone would like to see how the process has changed.
Thanks, Mel. It was also in our November 2025 newsletter. If you're signed up for our newsletter, you should have got that. If not, you can sign up for that on the website as well. Doing a bit of comms plug in there. As mentioned already, we're here to talk about the Lewisham Council further investigation. So at the time of recording this, as you mentioned, further investigations are linked to paragraph 49 of the Housing Ombudsman scheme, which says the Ombudsman may conduct further investigation beyond the initial complaints or member to establish whether any presenting evidence is indicative of a systemic failing. Where this is the case, it will be referred to the appropriate regulatory body. So in a nutshell, we carry out further investigations into individual landlords to find out if there's ongoing or wider failure by the landlords. How did we end up investigating Lewisham for this one, Mel?
So the decision to review Lewisham Council was brought about due to the pattern we saw in our casework on how the landlord was handling leaks, damp and mould, complaints and repairs. We wanted to take a closer look at the way the landlord worked, if it was aware of the issues within those areas and what it was doing to minimise the impact to residents, and to see if there were any other areas of focus the landlord needed to review. We also saw an above-average maladministration rate from the landlord of 85% in 2023 and 24, and we wanted to work with Lewisham Council to help identify any improvement areas.
Thanks, Mel. So we started this investigation because we had concerns about poorly handled leaks, damp and mould, complaints and repairs. And for context for those who are listening, firstly, can you tell us where Lewisham Council is based? What type of landlord is Lewisham Council? I think we can probably guess this one from the name, but what challenges has the council faced over the last few years? And we gave them a wider order in the past, didn't we, as well?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, so I'll start with the first point. So Lewisham Council, it's a local authority in Greater London, and they provide social housing to over 20,915 properties. So currently Lewisham as a borough is experiencing population growth at higher rates than the average in other London areas, meaning there's a greater demand for homes in the area, and as such a shortage for properties. So the age and condition of the houses, along with the challenging financial climate, is proving difficult for any council, Lewisham included. Alongside the standard challenges councils face, Lewisham also resumed ownership of its housing stock and management from its arm's length management organisation, or ALMO, known as Lewisham Homes. It took back management of its homes in October 23 and is still feeling the impact of that transfer. So yeah, the council adopted a lot of issues carried over from the ALMO, and it didn't look to put any measures in place really until recently, and that was to change the way it ran. That's because a lot of the same staff and systems moved straight from the ALMO back into the council without any additional training, for example. But soon after the Almo moved back in-house, we did issue a wider order to Lewisham. And just to confirm, a wider order asks the landlord to take action to improve its service in general, as opposed to an order made that relates to an individual complaint. We ordered the landlord to carry out a wider order to review its repair practices.
Thanks, Mel. So wider orders are legally binding orders, which, as you said there, require member landlords to review their policies or practices to prevent service failures. And they were actually introduced as part of the Social Housing Regulation Act and are designed to extend fairness and protection to wider residents beyond the individual complaint that we've investigated. So Lewisham had one of these in the past, one of these wider orders. So now linking back to this investigation, when did you start working with Lewisham as part of the further investigation? And in some previous investigations, your team have been out to meet the landlord face to face. Did you do it in this case with Lewisham? Did you go and meet them face to face?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we started. We didn't meet them at first, so we started by asking for evidence from Lewisham in around December 24, and then we arranged to meet them in December 25 to talk about what we'd seen in our casework, things reviewed in the evidence, but most importantly to get an up-to-date account of where Lewisham was. So we're very aware that our casework is not bang up to date, and we wanted to ensure that further investigation was balanced. I wanted to present Lewisham as it is now, reflecting any changes it's made, new policies it's put in place, and to get an idea of how it's operating today, what its challenges are, and to gain a feel for how Lewisham is of its own, how aware Lewisham is, of its own areas for improvement.
Did you speak to any residents who have Lewisham as their landlord as part of the investigation? And if you did, what did they tell you?
Yeah, we did. As well as speaking to Lewisham staff, we held resident sessions, so that was both in person and virtually. We wanted to hear from residents and the issues affecting them. We asked residents to think of complaints or repairs they'd made recently and talk about their experiences. And during those sessions, residents did really open up about vulnerability as well, speaking of challenges they face and how it appeared harder to get help if you were vulnerable. Feeling like it wasn't really an area of focus for the council, and they wanted to see improvements really in that area, and they also gave an oversight of their feelings on contractors and the work that they carried out as well.
Should we talk now about the themes you identified in the investigation? Maybe because phase one of our law has just come in, can we talk about hazards first?
Yeah, absolutely. So we identified 5 main themes, those being hazards, as you mentioned, as well as communication with an attitude towards residents. And we also looked at contract management, knowledge and information management, and the systems the landlords used. So in terms of hazards, it has been the first time really that we focused on hazards as a main theme in a further investigation. It is, however, a very important area of focus, with the severity of hazards can potentially mean that a resident is living in a dangerous situation with immediate risk to their health and safety. And landlords should be assessing any identified or reported hazards under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, or as some people know it, it's just as HHSRS. So that rating system gives a minimum standard for the decency of houses. So landlords should be carrying out assessments of a house and assigning a category to each hazard depending on its severity. And Lewisham admitted to not previously using the rating system to assess those hazards and also failing to keep a proper record of them. So in September 24, Lewisham identified that 24% of its houses didn't meet the decent home standard, and the landlord has recently completed a stock condition survey where it has now assessed its houses to identify any works and repairs each property needs. So it found that the leading cause of non-decency was damp and mould, with 3,295 cases open in September 24. It is, however, making improvements, and that figure has dropped to under 1,800 as of July 25. And while that drop is, it's really promising, it can be easy to forget that there are people and families still living in those properties that we're discussing. And as I outlined in the report, one family with 6 children, for instance, were forced to live with a leak and mould, and the resident expressed her distress over the leak and that it has actually caused a hole to appear in a ceiling, and that resident was concerned about the ceiling actually collapsing. Now, the landlord did put a temporary board to cover that hole, but it didn't actually offer a permanent solution to the leak. And the impact of the impact of the landlord not assessing and treating the hazard properly meant that that resident then was scared to be in a home and actually what might happen with the ceiling.
Thanks, Mel, for reminding us of the human impact behind such cases. It's really, really concerning to hear that the family in that case had to live with that leak and mould, and also with the fear of the ceiling collapsing. And the residents' distress is completely understandable. They were left feeling unsafe in their own home, and nobody should feel scared to be in their property, which is why that thorough action is so important, not just to fix hazards, but also to restore confidence and security for residents. And OAB's law has now been introduced to improve housing conditions and tenants' rights in social housing, obviously following the tragic death of 2-year-old OAB Ishak due to that mould exposure in his home. And I touched on this in my previous question, but what were Lewisham doing to prepare for OAB's law phase 1, which came in at the end of October 2025?
Yeah, well, ABS law, so it is now in place, and we'll receive updates on Lewisham's progress against it during our monitoring meetings. But for those who aren't aware, so ABS law is new housing legislation and looks for landlords to take certain actions within specific timescales against hazards associated with damp and mould and emergency repairs. More hazards will be covered under AWAB's law by 2027, but it's being introduced in stages to help landlords prepare for it. When we met with Lewisham in January 25, the team dealing with preparing for AWAB's law came across as very passionate to get things right for residents. And while optimistic, they did speak about challenges and obstacles that they would need to remove before being able to fulfil their plans. So these included a lack of available surveyors and issues that they faced with recruiting into that role. So meaning at the time they were unable to meet the specified timescales. But since our visit, however, the landlord has advised it has recruited 7 additional surveyors and extra administration roles to help with adhering to those timescales.
Yes, being able to capture and hold data is really, really key to landlord operations. And without having good record keeping functions, it's going to be really, really difficult for different areas of the organisation to communicate with each other. And residents are ultimately going to be impacted by that. The more data the landlord has and uses about residents and stock and housing stock reduces the chances for hazards in their homes being missed. And we talk about this more in our Spotlight on Knowledge and Information Management report. And we say in there that landlords need to have a system or systems which allow information to be captured. But also you can have the best system in the world, but if staff are putting in the wrong information or not putting information in there at all, or if there's a user error, or the organisation doesn't have quality insurance, for example, in place, when those things will continue to go wrong. The theme of knowledge and information management came up in this investigation as well, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. I mean, issues with knowledge and information management was a theme that was acknowledged and spoken about by most of the Lewisham staff we met in January. So they did appear to have a confused and disjointed approach to data collection, storage systems, quality assurance, and just a general lack of control over the information held in general. Some of the issues stem from the Almo moving back in-house and Lewisham realising that actually a lot of the data it had on its stock was out of date. As mentioned, Lewisham have updated most of the housing data now following the survey they've done, so at least 80% of their properties have now been surveyed. And Lewisham admitted to having little confidence in its data and has been working to correct that, so not only to help address any immediate issues residents are facing, but also to help plan where future investments need to be made.
Thanks, Mel. Just trying to plug another Spotlight report here, but to link in another one of our reports, it's the Attitude, Respect and Rights report, and we're saying that landlords should extend beyond the law and statutory requirements and move to a human-centric model of service provision where they respond to a vulnerable person's individual needs and circumstances. How does Lewisham get to know its residents, and how is it capturing information and then using that information to inform its service provision?
Well, Yeah, and another key theme running through the evidence and meetings that we had with staff was Lewisham's approach to vulnerability, both how it stored the vulnerability information and how it accessed it. So much like the stock survey allows Lewisham to understand its properties, it's also now carrying out a further survey to get to know its residents. And while this is a needed exercise, we found it had to be coupled with an assurance that the data was stored and used effectively. The landlord has been using multiple systems to hold resident data, but its systems don't actually interact well with each other, meaning information held on one system may not then be able to be seen on another. So staff told us that it made it confusing and difficult to track repairs, resident and housing information. And while confusing for staff, the real impact was being felt by residents. So in one case we looked at a resident who had to continue to live with a leak due to the lack of available information on it. So difficulty with information being held in multiple places meant that it was hard for staff to monitor the repairs, which impacted any follow-on works being promptly raised or completed. All the while though leaving the resident feeling helpless and spending a lot of their own time cleaning up water and mould. The impact was also felt by vulnerable residents. Lewisham staff showed concern about previous ways vulnerability information had been captured and held on its systems, with some vulnerability information only being stored on spreadsheets or in personal email boxes, meaning it was then not available for everyone who needed it to view.
And when that vital information is stored in spreadsheets or personal inboxes, it does limit visibility and it does risk failing to provide that right support to residents. And that is a really good demonstration of why accurate, accessible, centralised information is critical, not just for operational efficiency, but also for safeguarding residents' well-being. And having that good knowledge and information management, it equips staff with the tools they need to act quickly and effectively. So you said that Lewisham previously had the Arm's Length Management Organisation, or ALMO, and for context, this is a not-for-profit company set up by a local authority to manage its council housing stock. Lewisham moved their ALMO back in-house. Why did they do this?
This appeared to be prompted following a change to regulatory standards and legislation in 2017 following the Grenfell fire. So the change meant that landlords had greater accountability that they could no longer pass on to the ALMOs. As such, Lewisham Council took the opportunity to assess if the ALMO was still of benefit and consulted with residents to see if housing should be brought back into the council. When they did the survey, 71% of residents that responded agreed to the removal of the ALMO and expressed a desire for housing services to improve and to be delivered more efficiently, remaining unhappy with timescales to complete repairs, answer phones, and also how the ALMO addressed damp and mould.
Did the move back in-house throw up any issues? And if it did, what was it doing to rectify the issues? I know you talked about some a bit earlier on, but could you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, so it did. As mentioned, the move away from the ALMO was a lift and shift of staff and processes back into Lewisham Council. So shortly after the removal of the ALMO, our casework made an order for the landlord to find a root cause of the adopted ALMO issues affecting repair services. And the council commissioned an external review by an independent consultant to look into those repair practices. The review was concluded in March 24 and found a number of areas that the landlord actually needed to address. These included cultural issues, service delivery failures, systemic failures, and training gaps. The landlord identified that a new system was needed and had procured a system which it hoped would provide a solution to almost half of those review's recommendations.
In the investigation report, it says that Lewisham has a lack of oversight on work being carried out by its internal and external repairs teams. And this was something echoed by the Lewisham cases we investigated. Basically, residents making requests over and over again for work to be completed because the initial job wasn't done well enough, or because the issue was still occurring, it was still happening. What was going on, Mel?
Yeah, so within the report, we headlined a lot of the issues under contract management. This was because through talking to Lewisham staff and residents, it became evident that Lewisham had an issue with the management of its contractors. So it had little confidence in some of the contracting teams to deliver what was needed. And residents were dealing with failed appointments, the multiple visits, as you mentioned, but they were also being provided with incorrect information and ultimately being left living in substandard accommodation. So the issues were leading to, understandably, to resident frustration, and we found that vulnerable residents were disproportionately affected by those delays. The landlord did outline that it didn't previously have the skills needed for procurement of contractors and was looking to improve on this and work with contractors to deliver a better service. And positively, when we met with it for the first monitoring meeting in November 25, it did tell us that it had actually taken on 2 temporary procurement specialists to help bring on board new contractors or strengthen relationships with contractors it already had. So the landlord also mentioned that its in-home repairs team had actually gone through a change as well, and where it had previously told us in January 25 that the in-house repair teams were completing less than 2 repair jobs per day, the changes made have already improved those numbers to an average of 5 completed jobs per day. The landlord is also now taking further steps to improve the element of its service and has started to and continues to meet regularly with contractors to help monitor the performance. It's also put more focus on testing the quality of its repairs, and in doing so has identified areas for improvement, which has led to it stepping away from some contracting services because the quality and service has not actually been in line with what Lewisham expected.
And we talk about this performance monitoring more in our Spotlight on Repairing Trust, which was released in May 2025. And we talk in there about the triangle of trust between the landlord, contractor and resident, and that this should start at procurement. And looking at it from the perspective of the trust between the landlord and contractor, there needs to be that clear communication and also strong relationship management. And our research for that Spotlight report demonstrates that quality services has to begin with clear expectations and post-work evaluations as well. And here's a quote from the report. So it says, "Trust between landlords, residents and operatives can help with access, speed up problem diagnosis, and make sure residents' vulnerabilities are considered when prioritising and carrying out repairs, minimising distress and inconvenience. Robust quality assurance practices may help evaluate performance and raise service standards." So now back to this investigation, you made some recommendations that Lewisham enact to improve on the issues you identified in your investigation. Can you tell us a bit more about those recommendations?
Yeah, we would like to see really it build on the work it's already doing. So making sure it is a strong steer to get repair work back to an acceptable level, reducing the number of outstanding repairs through system improvements and continued better monitoring.
We talked already about our Spotlight report on attitudes, respect and rights, but just want to bring it in here again because the culture of an organisation it is really key, and it's part of its learning from complaints and using them to see how the service really is working. And you highlighted in the report that we have found residents of the landlord have not been consistently afforded respect. Can you tell us what you found with regards to this? What are Lewisham doing to try and rebuild the trust with residents?
Yeah, we did. We found that the landlord had not always adopted the right tone within its correspondence. So we saw a failure to prioritise repairs, complaints and updates, a lack of empathy, a lack of emphasis on learning and issues with the landlord's displayed attitude. So we looked at many different areas of the landlord to explore the culture, and it didn't consistently meet the expected standard. So the landlord had an overriding communication challenge it had to address, not only needing to improve its communication activity, but also the tone and empathy applied to it. So we saw examples of complaints being raised because of a lack of communication with the resident. In one case, a resident had complained about the landlord's lack of communication following a neighbour installing unauthorised CCTV. The resident felt extremely uncomfortable with being watched, and the landlord had provided assurances for over a year that it would take action and provide updates. So the landlord hadn't provided updates and hadn't communicated with that resident during the process, which actually then led the resident to carry out a further complaint, which could have easily been avoided had the landlord communicated effectively. The landlord did tell us during our first monitoring meeting that it is carrying out a lot of work on communication and culture. It's carrying out training, providing webinars for discussions, and is soon due to provide us with a copy of its new communication policy. So hopefully, in order to regain trust from residents, Lewisham are trying to make changes to be more reliable for them. Its new system should hopefully work to remove a lot of the broken trust around repairs. It should allow repair operatives to book any follow-on work with the residents there and then. It allows for better quality assurance as repair staff can take pictures of the work carried out and capture real-time resident feedback. In terms of complaints, residents have been left waiting for responses, with only around 20% of stage 1 responses sent on time in December 24. We also saw examples in our casework of Lewisham not answering all complaint points that residents had raised and a failure to offer proper resolutions. We found that the collection of issues alludes to a lack of focus and importance placed on resident complaints and the learning that the landlord can gain from them. And if a landlord does not value or respect its own complaints process, then it actually can be perceived by residents as a lack of respect or devaluation of them and their needs.
So to try and improve its complaint response quality, Lewisham have implemented a complaint handling improvement plan. What is this plan? How do they see it helping? And from what you've seen so far, how is it helping?
Yeah, the plan came about as the landlord recognised the need to provide greater guidance to its staff to improve the complaint process. So the complaint handling improvement plan has strived to do this. The plan provided to staff it provided staff with guides to complaint handling and an aim to improve the quality of it. The guides were to help staff investigate complaints and do so effectively, as well as to review complaints. We were pleased to see that Lewisham were trying to bring some consistency and training to the complaint process, but we also found a few issues with the messages and undertones in some of the guides. Some of those guides implied that the residents may not be telling the truth during complaints, and others encouraged staff to keep track of complaints in their own way. We would have rather have seen a positive message throughout the document and a clear instruction of how to assess all aspects of the complaint in a uniform way. If they had done it that way, it would have made it easier for everyone working on complaints to know the process and better consistency when quality checking.
So we talked earlier on, you visited Lewisham in this case, and you spoke with Lewisham residents, and they raised some issues which we did mention earlier. What has Lewisham done to specifically address the issues that the residents raised?
Yeah, one of the things residents raised with us was the attitude they experienced by the contact centre when they spoke to Lewisham. So they reported not receiving promised callbacks or responses to the emails, or receiving responses with an unwelcome tone or lacking detail. So residents expressed just wanting to feel like a human being with their issues addressed with empathy. The landlord had already taken steps to try to improve this aspect of its culture by seating its senior managers within the contact centre to encourage improved service. And the landlord has also provided additional training with a focus on values and behaviours, recognising the pressures felt by staff and the workload they faced. And to combat the pressure, the landlord has now taken on additional staff. They've also worked on reducing call waiting time so that residents can speak to them sooner, and they've made a lot of progress in this area by reducing waiting time from 21 minutes in January 25 to 3 minutes in July 25. So all of those actions the landlord is taking are positive steps to help rebuild the trust between itself and residents.
So we released this report at the beginning of October 2025. How did Lewisham respond to the report and also to the investigation?
Lewisham have been really cooperative throughout the investigation. They've engaged with us, provided everything we've asked for, and been really open and candid about the challenges they face. Within its learning statement, Lewisham acknowledged its impact, the impact of its failures on residents, reiterating that the improvement work they've carried out, even since we started the investigation, and outlining its focus areas for the future.
Have you made any recommendations for Lewisham following the investigation?
Yeah, we have. Following the investigation and a review of the orders made against Lewisham from the included cases, we put forward 8 recommendations. So we did change the way that the recommendations were structured, making them less prescriptive and more reflective. we put the onus on Lewisham, its member responsible for complaints and its governing body, to put plans in place to combat some of the improvement areas identified. We felt that was more impactful, that landlords now have to look at the recommendations and really think about how they're going to carry them out, instead of actually us just telling the landlords to do X, Y or Z. So the full recommendations can be found within the report, but we made 2 recommendations relating to hazards, 1 for communication, 3 relating to attitudes, respects and rights, and 1 relating to quality assurance.
So the further investigation report was released at the beginning of October 2025. What are we doing now at the Housing Ombudsman Service to continue to work with Lewisham and to monitor them now the report is out?
We had our first monitoring meeting in November where Lewisham provided an update on the recommendations outlined in the report. So we'll continue to meet with them now for a further 2 months. Within that time, we don't expect Lewisham will have completed the recommendations, but we are looking for it to evidence that it's started the process in addressing those areas of concern.
That brings us to the end of the podcast, Mel. Thank you so much for your time today. And I just want to say that this report wouldn't have been possible without the support of Sam, Norman Henney and Zoe Miller in the compiling of this report, who worked on this with you, Mel. So thank you very much to those guys.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you who've listened to this podcast as well. So this investigation into Lewisham was one of the last old ways of conducting these types of further investigations. You can read more about our new approach to further investigations, formerly known as special investigations, on our website and in our November newsletter as well. And you can also read the Lewisham investigation report on the website too, and access loads more of our podcasts and resources on there as well. And if you're a member of the Housing Ombudsman scheme, you can also get exclusive access to our Centre for Learning Landlord Hub, details of which you can also find on our website. That's www.housing-ombudsman.org.uk. Thanks for listening, everyone, and goodbye.